Traditional values are often meant to strengthen families. But what happens when those same values turn into tyranny, fear, and absolute control? In a quiet Italian town surrounded by vineyards and sun-washed hills, no one knew what terror was unfolding behind the walls of a modest apartment. Neighbors saw a family who kept to themselves, a hard-working mother, polite children, and a stern father. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. But inside that apartment, a different world existed, one ruled by fear. This is the story of Makka Sulaev, a girl raised in fear, pushed to the brink, forced to choose between her mother's life or her father's. Makka Sulaev was born in Chechnya, raised in a conservative family built on the rigid customs and strong religious identity common in that region. Life there was harsh. His father controlled his family strictly, demanding that everyone, especially the women, obey him. While the boys were punished less frequently, physical violence in the home was considered normal. The father was the absolute authority, the provider, while the mother cared for the children under constant scrutiny. Any small act of disobedience resulted in brutal punishment. Growing up in this environment, Makka learned to see such cruelty as a natural order of life. The Sulaev family was large, but the father's income was never enough to support everyone, so they lived modestly. Even as a young boy, Makka dreamed of leaving Chechnya behind. Italy became his imagined escape route, a place he believed he could reach through humanitarian channels. He never completed formal schooling, but from childhood he trained intensely in sports, eventually becoming skilled enough to teach karate and boxing, strong, athletic, and disciplined. He also underwent military-style training. Before leaving Chechnya, he married a woman named Natalia, and together they began building a family. By 2015, they already had 4 children. Following the example of his own father, Makka was strict, often cruel toward his family. He punished his sons only when they caused trouble, but he maintained full control over his wife and eldest daughter. Makka. Then came their chance to move. Makka, Natalia, their children settled in Nizza Monferrato, a small town in the province of Asti, Italy, with roughly 10,000 residents. The family lived in an apartment complex, and Natalia quickly found work at a local hotel washing dishes. While Natalia and Makka adapted well to the local community, Makka struggled even to learn Italian. Over time, it became clear that Natalia's income and resilience held the family together. Yet, despite moving to Europe, Makka never abandoned his deeply conservative worldview. Just like in Chechnya, he exercised rigid control over the women in his home. Makka Sulaev had endured her father's cruelty since childhood. She grew up under intense control, witnessed her father terrorizing her mother daily. Throughout her childhood, Makka desperately wanted to protect her mother, but she was too young. All she could do was endure and watch. As she grew older, especially after turning 16, she too became a direct target of her father's abuse. In Italy, she felt intimidated and suffocated by his dominance, conditioned to believe this was normal. After all, behavior like her father's was widespread in their community back in Chechnya. But attending a local Italian school opened a new world for her. She made friends, discovered a different way of living, and slowly understood that her family's life was not normal. Her classmates spoke of warmth, freedom, laughter, a stark contrast to the fear that filled her home. For the first time, Makka understood that her life could be different, a life free from her father's violence. Yet, she couldn't confide even in her closest friends, fearing they wouldn't understand, or worse, would judge her family's situation. It wasn't until Makka began working part-time at the same hotel as her mother that someone finally noticed something was wrong. A compassionate manager saw the marks of beatings on her body. This woman became the first adult outside the family whom Makka could trust. Makka's deepest wish was to protect herself and her mother from her father's escalating aggression. She knew she stood no chance against him physically. Makka was a large, athletic man who possessed tremendous strength. A single blow from him could end any attempt to resist. He was overly critical and always looked for mistakes. A speck of dust or a slightly misplaced object was enough for him to start criticizing. His temper worsened under the strain of financial instability. After their relocation, he struggled to find steady work. His lack of education left him with only low-paying, physically demanding jobs. And even after years in Italy, his limited Italian made things worse. As the children grew older, expenses increased, and the situation at home deteriorated further. For years, Natalia felt just as powerless. At the slightest sign of defiance, Akiad would drag her by the hair. He often summoned his sons to witness these assaults, while beating his wife, and sometimes his daughter. He lectured them, insisting this was how women must be treated, comparing them to animals that needed to be controlled. He knew exactly how to inflict pain without leaving visible bruises, making it nearly impossible for Natalia to seek help from authorities. This sense of impunity only emboldened him. And by late 2023, the violence had spiraled beyond control. That year, his brutality escalated sharply. He made explicit threats, severely beat Natalia, and for the first time, she gathered the courage to report him to the police. But when officers arrived, there were no visible injuries. Makka, desperate to protect her mother, stepped forward and told the police that her father had punched her in the stomach, his favorite tactic. A blow designed to knock the air out of her without leaving evidence. Followed by vicious hair-pulling, Natalia would collapse on the floor in agony while Akiad lectured his sons about how to discipline a wife. Despite Makka's brave testimony, the police remained doubtful, feeling untouchable. Akiad became even more ferocious. Makka repeatedly begged her mother to leave him. But Natalia had been terrorized for so long that she could no longer imagine escaping. After her last attempt to involve the police, Akiad threatened to kill her if she ever called them again. Makka watched her mother's fear deepen, and she became convinced that, eventually, her father would beat her mother to death. No matter how many times the police intervened, she felt trapped, but her determination to protect her mother only intensified. March 1st, 2024, began like any other day in the Sulaev household. Makka arrived at school in the morning not knowing what awaited her. That afternoon, she received a chilling message from Natalia, asking her to take care of her brothers and sister in case something happened to her. It was the first time her mother had ever sent such a message. It terrified Makka. She immediately left class, requested time off, and rushed home. On her way, another message arrived. This one from her father. "When you get back, I'll rip your head off." Overcome with dread, Makka hurried home. Inside, she found her father yelling at her mother yet again. From their shouted words, she pieced together what had happened. Akiad had been fired, yet again, this time from the same hotel where she and Natalia worked. His dismissal had triggered another explosive confrontation. In a fit of bruised pride, he demanded that Natalia quit her job as well. He had even gone to the hotel during her shift to cause a scene, but when she asked him how they were supposed to survive, he had no answer. Natalia refused to obey him. He left the hotel in a rage, and when she returned home, the argument resumed, louder, sharper, more venomous than before. When Makka rushed inside the apartment, her parents were shouting in the kitchen. She wanted desperately to intervene, but fear froze her in place. At 19, she knew that stepping between them could have deadly consequences. Afraid of provoking him further, Makka retreated to her room, while her siblings stayed hidden in theirs. The shouting continued, the tension mounting. She prayed it would somehow stop before violence erupted again. At moments like these, Makka often took out her journal and scribbled short notes. Writing helped her steady her thoughts and calm her nerves. She tried to do the same this time, but she didn't get far. The tension in the kitchen suddenly escalated. She heard a sharp thud, then another. Makka rushed out of her room, saw her father slam her mother onto the floor, kick her repeatedly. For the first time in her life, Makka fought back. She struck him with her fists, desperate to stop the assault. The fact that his daughter dared to raise her hand to hit him made him extremely shocked. He froze for a moment, long enough for Natalia to struggle to her feet. Trembling and terrified, she tried to calm him, begging him to stop. Instead, he turned on Makka. He hit her hard. Natalia instinctively shielded her daughter, only to be struck again, knocked to the ground as Akiad climbed on top of her and began choking her. He screamed that Natalia's rebellion was the reason Makka had become so defiant. The situation spiraled out of control in seconds. Makka tried once more to pull him off her mother, but the girl, small, thin, untrained, had no chance against a man who was muscular, trained in combat sports, and full of rage. Still, she refused to give up. She knew, with chilling certainty, that if nothing was done, her mother would die on the kitchen floor. In a panic, Makka snatched a large knife and plunged it into her father's back with all the strength she had. The blow stunned him. He staggered forward, and blood began pouring rapidly from the wound. Even then, he did not fall. Bleeding heavily, Akiad got to his feet and lurched toward the front door, locking it from the inside, a terrifying sign that the danger was far from over. He turned toward his daughter again, still intent on attacking. Makka struck once more. The second stab wound was deep. Blood quickly pooled across the floor. This time, Akiad weakened. His legs buckled. He collapsed. Natalia rushed to Makka, who was frozen in place, trembling violently. The girl slid down the wall, stared in shock as her father bled out on the kitchen tiles. The younger children, drawn by the commotion, ran out of their rooms, surrounded their dying father in panic. Natalia immediately pushed them away and called emergency services. Through hysterical breaths, she said her husband had tried to kill her, and her daughter had stabbed him to protect them. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the apartment. 50-year-old Akiad lay unconscious, barely breathing. He was rushed to the nearest hospital, but the blood loss was extreme. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The autopsy later confirmed that the first wound alone was fatal. When officers found Makka, and she was still pressed against the wall in shock, as soon as she saw them, she confessed. She repeated that she had acted in self-defense, that her father had attacked her mother, then her, and she had no other way to stop him. Natalia corroborated everything. She showed the officers multiple bruises on her arms and torso and the red marks around her throat where she had been strangled. It was clear that the lack of external injuries over the years didn't mean the violence hadn't happened, only that Akiad had learned how to strike without leaving evidence. During the initial inspection of the home, police noticed something troubling. The knife Makka used had not come from the kitchen. During interrogation, they discovered that she had purchased it a few days before the tragedy. Before going to the station, Makka handed the police her diary. It contained page after page recounting years of assaults, scenes of beatings, choking, terror, and humiliation. She believed it would prove why she had done what she did. The claim of long-term violence was supported not only by Natalia, but also by Makka's brothers and younger sister, all of whom described similar scenes. However, law enforcement interpreted the pre-purchase of the large knife as possible evidence of premeditation, that Makka may have planned to kill him rather than acting purely in the heat of the moment. Investigators carefully examined her diaries. The Italian written entries documented years of physical and psychological abuse, especially during the family's time in Nizza Monferrato. Makka insisted the abuse had begun even earlier, in Chechnya, but those older diaries had been lost during the move. One particular detail caught the attention of investigators. Her final diary entry was especially grim. Makka wrote that if anyone ever discovered her notes, it would mean either she or her father was dead. She explained that she had written it during a moment of anger and despair, insisting she had not seriously contemplated killing him. However, investigators interpreted the entry, combined with the advanced purchase of the knife, as evidence of premeditation. She explained that her decision to buy a large knife days before the tragedy stemmed from another terrifying incident that convinced her their lives were genuinely at risk. She described her profound attachment to her mother, someone she felt responsible for protecting at any cost. She explained that after years of abuse, she knew her father's power, the sheer physical force he wielded over his family, and feared that a small kitchen knife would be useless against him. She was terrified that if she ever needed to defend herself or her mother, a small knife would only enrage him further, leading him to kill them both. So she bought a larger 30-centimeter knife, just in case. Makka insisted she had not meant to kill Akyad. She only wanted to stop him, to save her mother, to save herself. She simply couldn't endure another day of living in fear. While Makka was being questioned, investigators continued gathering testimony from relatives and neighbors. Not everyone confirmed that Akyad had terrorized his family, but the digital evidence painted a far clearer and far more disturbing picture. On Makka's phone, detectives found a chilling message from her mother sent shortly before the attack, urging her daughter to take care of the younger ones in case something happened. They also discovered a message written by Akyad to an acquaintance only hours before his death. In it, he said he was preparing to give a concert. Members of the local Chechen community familiar with the family explained that Akyad often used this expression to refer to violent outbursts or dramatic scenes that could lead to public scandal, including beatings, serious assaults, and even killings. This interpretation indirectly supported Makka's claim that both she and her mother felt they were in mortal danger that night. Natalia insisted that had her daughter not intervened, she would likely have been killed. She called Makka her savior and begged authorities for leniency, arguing that her daughter had acted out of necessity. Both mother and daughter mourned Akyad's death, despite everything he had done. Makka also feared deeply for her younger brothers. She worried that if her father was not stopped, they would grow up believing that cruelty toward women was normal, the same philosophy passed down to Akyad from his own father. She recognized these attitudes as a cultural norm in her community and part of her heritage. However, she strongly disagreed with the idea that women should be forced into submission through violence. After considering the overall testimony of the relevant witnesses from the start, the defense argued for leniency, framing the act as self-defense under extreme and prolonged abuse. Family members described Akyad's cruel disciplinary methods, dragging Natalia and Makka by the hair, striking them in ways that left minimal marks, and forcing his sons to watch so they would learn how women should be treated. Despite these efforts, Makka remained in custody. Her attorney requested house arrest given her age, circumstances, but the court rejected the motion. Natalia visited her daughter daily, though strict regulations prevented direct contact. Natalia constantly asked about Makka's condition and what the future might hold. In return, Makka worried about her mother and siblings. Everyone was shaken by the sudden death of the family patriarch. Even Makka admitted she had never imagined things would escalate so far. The moral dilemma of the case weighed heavily on prosecutors. While Makka was undeniably the one who wielded the knife, the victim had allegedly driven her to it through years of unchecked violence. Investigators worked to build a coherent case, but the evidence was contradictory. The long-term abuse Natalia described had never been formally documented, and many acquaintances claimed they had never witnessed any signs of domestic violence. Others suggested that cultural pressures, shame, and a distrust of authorities might explain why earlier complaints had gone unreported, or why initial police intervention had failed to protect the family. Natalia, who worked long hours as a dishwasher, hid her struggles from nearly everyone around her. She rarely shared anything personal with colleagues, and the only person who seemed aware of what was happening behind closed doors was one of the hotel managers. Natalia never openly complained about her husband. Instead, she excused his behavior as cultural tradition. She also showed officers several faint bruises, the traces of years of abuse carefully concealed. Neighbors, however, insisted they had never heard any screaming or fighting despite the alleged long-term violence. Meanwhile, a close friend and co-worker of the entire family offered important context. She confirmed that the most recent conflict erupted after Akyad was fired. He had quit his job a few days before the incident. On the day of the tragedy, he demanded both Natalia and Makka quit their jobs as well. Natalia, fully aware that her husband had no real job prospects, refused to obey. She feared plunging the family into severe financial hardship. Her defiance only intensified Akiad's rage. After the murder, Natalia returned to work just 3 days later, determined to support her children alone. She endured everything with quiet resilience, but she worried deeply for Makka, who remained in jail awaiting trial. The defense fought tirelessly for leniency. Although Makka was not permitted to return home during the investigation, her attorney highlighted her spotless academic and personal record. She had recently been accepted into college with excellent grades and was known by teachers, friends as warm, deeply kind. No one suspected the violence she endured at home. To the outside world, Makka is the only one who kills for justifiable reasons. It became clear to everyone who knew her that what happened was an act of self-defense, a desperate attempt to save herself and her mother. Support for Makka grew rapidly. When the hearings began, the defense described the Sulaev household as a place of suffering and humiliation. Akiad dominated his wife and eldest daughter completely, prohibiting even the simplest decisions. He punished the slightest disobedience with cruelty, turning daily life into a continuous spectacle of fear. The defense emphasized that Makka had never shown any violent tendencies. At school and at work, she had always behaved respectfully, modestly, and kindly. The prosecution, however, argued a different narrative. They insisted the first stab wound inflicted on Akiad was already fatal, claiming it would have been enough to stop the attack. According to them, the second strike was a deliberate attempt to kill. They portrayed Makka's actions as premeditated murder. Makka maintained that she had no desire to kill her father. She acted because she believed her mother was about to die. Even after the first blow, he remained upright, moving toward her with clear intent to attack. She believed he was still dangerous and felt she had no choice but to stab him again. The prosecutor also pointed out that no formal complaints of domestic violence had ever been filed, contradicting Natalia and Makka's statements that they had sought help from police but received none. Fear of retaliation, the family explained, prevented them from filing further complaints. A landmark 2020 case, in which a young man named Alex stabbed his abusive father 6 times with kitchen knives to save his mother, played a significant role in shaping the court's approach. Although the father died, the appellate court ruled that Alex had acted in legitimate self-defense, overturning his original sentence of more than 100 years in prison. The ruling caused national debate and set a controversial but influential precedent. Given this precedent, the defense petitioned for Makka's full acquittal, insisting she had acted in legitimate self-defense. But the judge was not convinced. Even the prosecutor acknowledged the emotional and moral complexity of the case, noting that the investigation had confirmed the years of abuse endured by Makka and her mother. However, in his closing argument, the prosecutor stressed that, despite the tragic circumstances, the responsibility for taking a life still rested with Makka. He requested a 7-year prison sentence, significantly lower than the maximum, recognizing the extraordinary context behind the killing. On May 8, 2025, the Asti court convicted Makka Sulaev, sentenced her to 9 years and 4 months in prison. Despite the disappointment, Makka's lawyer has already filed appeals, aiming to reduce her sentence or overturn the conviction entirely. Until those appeals are heard, the trial court's judgment stands.